We have a lot to talk about with the Toronto Maple Leafs. We're going to recap the Brendan Shanahan press conference, take a look at what we know from that. We have more news from the Maple Leafs as well, including the resignation by Jason Spezza. We have some trade rumors we want to take a look at on a couple of key players, Matthews, Nylander, Marner, how does this all affect them. We'll discuss all the latest with the Leafs. Who could their next GM be as well? All that coming up next. So welcome back to another video here at Top Shelf Hockey. Of course, we're once again talking with the Leafs. So they've dominated the news cycle here over the past few days, and with the news that keeps coming out, that's continuing to happen. So of course, on the Friday before a long weekend here in Canada, no big shocker. I expected today was going to be a huge day for Maple Leafs news. Earlier this morning, we found out that GM Kyle Dubas would not be returning to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and based on the Maple Leafs press release, it certainly made it sound like it was more of a team decision than it was a Kyle Dubas decision. Even though we knew that his contract was expiring, word on the street was that negotiations had gone well, and the job was his as long as he wanted it. Based on his press conference at the beginning of the week, there was some doubt that he would return, based on his comments about how difficult this season has been on him and his family, and that he needed a little bit of time to make a decision, and said that he would either be working for the Leafs or taking some time off, basically, that he wouldn't be popping up elsewhere unexpectedly next week or something like that. Now, of course, I wonder, though, if things have changed or not, but of course, Brendan Shanahan, of course, clarifies the Kyle Dubas departure today. He kind of went through a very thorough timeline of events, kind of dating back to last offseason, which we'll kind of recap quickly here as well, which is an unusual thing. It's not a bad thing. It's nice to see the transparency and the discussion around, I guess, his version of the events and how everything unfolded. It's not something you normally see with that much detail. So in a way, it was kind of nice to understand. I do wonder at some point, I know it won't happen right away, but at some point down the road, if we ever get, a rebuttal or anything out of Kyle Dubas to see if there's a different version of the events or whatnot. But essentially, Shanahan confirms what we already kind of knew. Well, last year at the beginning of the offseason, he went and told Dubas that he was not going to be offered a contract extension and that he was going to be evaluated on the full 5 years of doing the job as a GM, and the decision would be made on his future by the end of this season. So he knew that. I mean, as much as he may not have been thrilled with it, he accepted it, and he publicly had made comments acknowledging that he was entering the final year of his contract without an extension in place, and he was prepared to handle it, and he did a good job. Shanahan confirmed that he felt that last offseason, he felt Kyle did a really good job with all the moves that they made. I thought the team was in good hands that way. They had a really good regular season. Confirmed again at the trade deadline, he thought things went really well. Was happy with a lot of the moves they made. Thought the team was in a good spot to succeed. And after the trade deadline, went to Kyle and started to give him the support for a contract extension. Told him that he had seen enough, that he believed in what he was doing, and that he wanted to go to the board and start working on an extension for him, because the anticipation was he wanted to have it wrapped up before the playoffs started, so that Kyle Dubas could focus on the team and not have that hanging over his head during the playoffs. That was the whole hope and expectation. Unfortunately, things never got to a point where they were able to wrap up a contract extension ahead of time. It kind of sounded like Dubas wanted to take a little bit more time. But basically, by the time we got to the playoffs and they went on to beat Tampa, it sure sounded like Shanahan was convinced that they had the framework, at least, of a done deal, essentially. And he said that at the end of the season, obviously, after he talked to Kyle after the loss, he says, as much as that was devastating, he said he wanted to kind of move on quickly from that because they always have a lot of other business to tend to. And he talked to Kyle about getting the contract extension wrapped up. And so obviously the intention was to get that done rather quick. They went through negotiation. Kyle has an agent that represents him and everything like that. And up until his press conference on Monday, Shanahan was under the belief that, like I said, that they had a framework for a done deal. It was pretty much, a given, and this was going to happen. And then Dubas actually went against Shanahan's wishes. Brendan said that he told Dubas that he did not recommend that he speak to the media. Shanahan himself said that Brendan Shanahan himself wanted to wait and speak to the media later once the contract extension was wrapped up so that they could talk about that all at the same time. And he recommended that Kyle not speak to the media on Monday. Let the players do it, and Kyle went against his wishes and said, no, he said, my players are going to speak. The coach is going to speak. I feel I owe it to the media to speak as well. So he kind of went against Shanahan's wishes, but Shanahan, I guess supported him to do that. But then was completely thrown off by the remarks. As a lot of people have been saying here in recent days, that Monday press conference and the remarks that Kyle Dubas made just absolutely changed everything. Even though Shanahan acknowledges that he and Kyle had some conversations around, the effect on his family and whatnot, he was still not expecting Kyle to come out and say that he didn't know if he wanted to be GM anymore. It completely threw everything off guard, and it kind of started putting a seed of doubt in Shanahan's mind over whether he was all in and would really, still be the guy to do the job. So obviously he started having some concerns. Said a couple of days went by. They never spoke after Wednesday. Finally, on Thursday, he had heard from Kyle and said that Kyle emailed him, he said, and told him he wanted to still be general manager and that his agent would be in touch with him. And when the agent got in touch with Shanahan, he wanted to renegotiate some of the terms of the contract. It sounded like he was looking for more money, and at least that's what most people are saying that they believe is the case. Also, but very well a big part of it could be as well as more authority. I mean, we know that based on everything, how it works in the Leafs org, that Shanahan is heavily involved with most, if not all, major decisions, and that Kyle Dubas was probably looking for more autonomy that way to be able to make some of these decisions without getting approval on absolutely everything. And I think he wanted, and probably felt after 5 years of getting good results in the regular season and basically getting good feedback from his bosses, that he deserved that, along with more money than they had already talked about. And Shanahan basically said that between the press conference on Monday and how everything went down through the week, that he started having second thoughts and that he decided that he needed to go in a different direction and that Dubas wasn't their guy anymore. And so he went to the board, recommended a change, got the approval for pulling the contract, and essentially, I guess you could say Dubas, in a way, he was fired. I know a lot of people are on social media defending him, saying he wasn't fired. But really, when you're going through contract negotiations and you have a contract that's being offered to you and then they pull it, it's kind of the same thing. Technically, will he go down as being fired? No, he's going to go down as not being re-signed. But it's not really mutual. When one party says, yep, I want to come back, I'm going to accept that, and then the other party says, yeah, no, we better change our heart, no thanks. It's basically a firing, so it doesn't really matter. It's a technicality. Call it what you want. So essentially, that press conference on Monday changed everything. Just like everybody said, got Shanahan thinking that he needed to go in a new direction. He said it was a dramatic shift in his thinking, and set on him thinking about maybe we need a different person in this role if he's not going to be all in. And here we are. So now, even though Dubas wanted to return, those negotiations that he tried to push on Shanahan to be part of that, they said, yeah, no thanks. So it's kind of sounded in a way that he kind of, like I said, it was being criticized a lot for the negotiations with some of the players and how they got basically everything they wanted. It was kind of the same kind of power push. And he called him on it and said, no, we're going in a different direction. So at the end of the day, Dubas is gone. So the search for a new GM is already underway. Obviously, Shanahan said he was going to be speaking to a lot more people in the organization and obviously working on finding that next person. He did make a comment to say that he was going to rely heavily on assistant GM Brandon Pridham for that during that process and to help take care of a lot of internal business in the interim. Shanahan also went on to say that having an experienced GM would be extremely attractive. So it's believed that most reporters and insiders are going with the sentiment here that they'd be quite surprised if the Toronto Maple Leafs hire somebody who was like a first-time new GM the way Kyle Dubas was. So that probably takes a GM, Brandon Pridham, out of the equation, and it probably takes some of the up-and-coming younger new executives around the league that are going to be getting opportunities sometime out of the question as well. Like, you're looking at like Tulsky out of Carolina and some other guys that are getting a lot of attention right now for potential GM openings. I don't see the Leafs going in that direction based on the comments of Brendan Shanahan. A lot of people are already making mention of a couple of names, primarily Brad Treliving, former GM of the Calgary Flames, and Mark Hunter, current, was a former elite employee. I was with the London Knights right now. The Hunter brothers run the London Knights organization in the OHL. And there's also some speculation that Mark Hunter could be being under consideration as well for the Flames GM role that Treliving has departed as well. So some interesting names there. Of course, we know Brad Treliving was one of the GMs that Dubas referenced in his presser as well for, if you're looking at a team, obviously kind of more on the Florida side of things, because I think Florida benefited from that massive trade involving Matthew Tkachuk more than the Flames did. But obviously, Treliving was a guy who was not afraid to pull off that kind of deal. So clearly that was a big part of it. And we know he's not afraid of that. He does have tons of experience. He worked with the Coyotes for a while as an AGM. He's worked in Calgary a long time. He's used to a Canadian market. You could make an argument that while he was in Calgary, they didn't really accomplish a whole lot. But I guess we'll have to see what the Leafs decide to do. I mean, he's well respected. I will say that much. That much we do know for sure. So that's the explanation in the aftermath of how everything kind of went down between Dubas and Shanahan. We know there was tension and a bit of a power shift there. The issue, this is kind of what we know as well about the potential new candidates for who might replace Kyle Dubas. And on top of that, Pierre LeBrun was able to confirm, I believe he was the first one to report it from TSN, saying that Jason Spezza, special assistant to the GM Kyle Dubas, has tendered his resignation to the Maple Leafs, and Spezza is also gone from the Leafs organization. Apparently, he resigned shortly before the Brendan Shanahan press conference. Now, of course, Shanahan did not make mention of this during his time at the podium, but that is the case. So Spezza is also gone, and we'll see what the future holds for him. I know Mike Stevens of the Hockey News, he's also got some connections too. He said his sources are indicating to him that after that press conference for Shanahan and how everything's gone down and been handled here, that there is a lot of very unhappy people within the Maple Leafs organization. Now, he was referencing mostly front office staff and other support staff, not necessarily players, he said. But still, there's a lot of people probably kind of on guard here. I mean, what's next? Now, the Maple Leafs also, and this is not the end of their shuffling today, the Toronto Marlies' entire coaching staff is also not being brought back. Now, they were all in the final years of their contract, so the head coach and the two assistant coaches, and I know one of the assistants was there for a long time as well, and none of those guys are being brought back as well. So the Marlies are going to have an entire new coaching staff next season as well. So, and when it comes to Brad Treliving, I know we had previously reported talking about updates for Frank Seravalli and Elliot Friedman saying that the Calgary Flames were not letting Brad Treliving interview for other open positions around the NHL because technically his contract doesn't expire until June 30th, and they don't necessarily have to. And even though it's usually pretty common practice to let people do that, I mean, they know that work relationship is ending. What's the big deal over a couple of weeks, really? And but now Seravalli is reporting that after reports have surfaced have been heavily discussed in the media, that the Flames are changing their approach and will let Treliving interview for other job opportunities and won't stand in the way if he's able to secure other employment. So obviously, if the Leafs do want to talk to Treliving, he will be able to do that if he's interested as well. So there is that. Now, at the Flames, quickly as well, is the Mark Hunter, one of the names mentioned about potentially being a Leaf again in the mix for Calgary. Their GM candidates right now, apparently the favorite looks like Craig Conroy, current assistant GM, seems to be the front runner. I know they've also mentioned Brad Pascal, the other AGM, also kind of in the mix, but Conroy appears to be the favorite, but other names there besides Hunter include Mark Bergevin, as well as Stan Bowman and Dave Norris, all apparently interviewed and are still under consideration, you could say. But some of those names could emerge as candidates in Toronto, too, depending on how extensive Shanahan wants to search and make a decision. But he did acknowledge as well that he, as much as he doesn't want to rush things and he wants to be thorough and make sure he gets it right, that it's an urgent situation where he needs to get this done fairly quick because of all the upcoming business. So he's like, that's why when Dubas made those comments and said what he did in the press conference on Monday is planting a seed of doubt in Brendan's mind and he needed to go in a different direction. And he didn't have a lot of time to sit around and wait. So they don't want to, find out further into the offseason here that Dubas is not able to follow through and be the guy. So anyways, I kind of understand, but it's kind of everything's falling apart here in spectacular fashion. And it's kind of really odd. I didn't expect this kind of implosion within the Leafs, or things that go down the way they have. Of course, when it comes to Sheldon Keefe, lots of questions that way as well. What's going to happen to him? Shanahan mentioned that essentially he was asked about that and said that the new GM will make the decision on the other changes that are coming or what other changes they see fit. So the new GM will determine the future of Sheldon Keefe and the coaching staff. Spencer Carberry, the assistant coach, is getting tons of attention from other teams on the head coach openings. So there's a really good chance that he won't be back either. So there's at the very least going to be at least some changes to the staff. But whether or not Sheldon's behind the bench or not, we don't know. We'll have to stay tuned. The new GM will make that decision here probably, I would think, probably fairly quick after getting hired, but we'll have to wait and see on that. Hard to determine what's next. I mean, Chris Johnston's also reporting the impact on Auston Matthews. Of course, Matthews and Riley and Nylander, they all have worked with Kyle Dubas a long time through pretty much all of their entire career, the whole time they've been with the Leafs. They really like him. They really respect him. They all spoke out in favor of him returning on their end-of-season media availability. I know especially Morgan Riley really spoke from the heart about how important Dubas was and basically said that, listen, Dubas has done a phenomenal job. He's excellent to us. At the end of the day, it's the players on the ice that didn't get the job done. And he's the only guy I really heard kind of take some responsibility and put it on them more than anybody else. So I would imagine that they're probably kind of devastated. It really kind of, I have a lot of questions, I guess, probably on the future of the team and what direction things are going to move in. Obviously, the Auston Matthews potential contract extension, and William Nylander as well, but obviously Matthews being the bigger name here, it's pivotal for this team. And he's 1 year from an unrestricted free agency, and he's only 1 month away from having a full no-move clause. So if they don't get a contract extension agreed to with him by July 1st, he's going to have a full no-move clause, can tell him if he wishes, I'm not signing and you can't trade me. And then he could walk for nothing. Like, it could be an absolute epic disaster if he decides that he's had enough. So, I mean, I don't know, the Shanahan plan is kind of imploding here, and obviously these decisions could impact what he thinks. Now, it may not. They may need to get a new GM that comes in, talks to Matthews, gets the vision, and maybe he's like, yep, that sounds good to me. Where do I sign? It could all work out. You don't know. But we don't know. That's the thing. I mean, all indications are that Auston Matthews really does enjoy playing in the city of Toronto, and he really does like being a Maple Leaf and wants to stay and try to make it work there. So we don't have reason to think that from that perspective he'd want to leave. But I guess, sometimes players have concerns over the direction of the team. They want to win. They want to be in the best position. And if he doesn't feel that that's where it is in Toronto, then he's going to have a lot of control here in the very near future if he changes his mind, which could be, like I said, an epic disaster for this team if they lost their franchise player who was the number 1 overall pick in 2016 to walk for nothing. That would be such a bad move. Because if they don't think they can sign Matthews, they can trade him, but they can only trade him for the next month or so until that no-move clause kicks in, and then he gets all the leverage. So this is utmost important and urgency for them to get this right and get this done. So obviously, CJ, Chris Johnston is saying that Matthews' extension talks are probably going to have to go on the back burner here a little bit, no doubt, because clearly they don't have a GM unless Shanahan himself is going to hold those discussions, which I don't see happening. So I would think that they're probably going to have a new GM fairly quick. That will be one of their top priorities, obviously, but I'd be curious to see the impact there, because like I said, he's going to have a lot of control very quickly, and if they felt like they couldn't sign him, if they had to trade him before like July 1, like a draft trade involving all, can you imagine how like the magnitude of that? Like, I mean, Leaf fans would be crushed, and it would be so sad for them to lose Auston Matthews. But we don't know where that's going. I think that's a little premature to say he's going to be traded or going to end up walking himself to free agency. But at the end of the day, it's a very important piece of their offseason, which they hope to get right. Now, the other thing I want to look at here quickly as well is there's some more trade talk. Most of the NHL insiders suggest that for a core 4 trade to take place, and by the core 4, the reason they call it core 4, a lot of people hate that term, and I'm not fond of it either, it's because of the core 4 forwards. It's not that Morgan Rielly is not viewed as being equally as important. A lot of people want to say the core 4 plus 44, the core 4 plus Rielly, whatever you want to call it. It's just because they're all forwards. It's the core 4 forwards. And like I said, you don't really want to trade Matthews for starters. And Tavares has a full no move, so he's not going anywhere. So everybody says it's Marner or Nylander. That's going to likely go. If they really want to change up the core and the DNA of this team and make a change, they're not going to make a change just for making change. They're going to make a change because they feel it makes them better. It gives them a better chance to win. It gives them a different look, a different identity that is going to allow them to be more successful. It's just that simple. And there is a Sportsnet article that has a trade proposal for both Marner and Nylander, which I wanted to propose to you today just to see what everybody thinks. I don't think either of them are deals that we will likely see, but you never know, because at this point, we have way more questions than answers and a lot more uncertainty around this franchise than we ever expected. I know after the round 2 loss happened, we all knew there was going to be changes. I just don't think we all expected things to go down the way they have. I think a lot of people, including myself, are still kind of stunned on how this is all played out. Now, the mock trade for Nylander, they suggest a trade involving the 3 teams, actually. It involves the Vancouver Canucks and the Chicago Blackhawks. It allows them to get back a player who gives them a different dynamic. It allows them to get rid of a bad contract, and it does involve trading Willie Stiles. Now, it sends William Nylander, along with defenseman Timothy Liljegren, to the Vancouver Canucks. In exchange, the Vancouver Canucks trade J.T. Miller to the Toronto Maple Leafs, and they also trade goalie Matt Murray to get him off the books to the Chicago Blackhawks. And in exchange, the Blackhawks also get a couple of draft picks, one from Toronto and one is Vancouver. So essentially, Vancouver trades Miller and a pick to Toronto for Nylander and Liljegren, and then in turn, the Leafs take that pick, package it with Murray, add a pick of their own, and send that off to the Chicago Blackhawks. So they get rid of a bad contract for 1 year of Murray. They lose another mid-round pick. They get J.T. Miller, who signed on a long-term deal, which is, if he plays to that 90-point potential like he did last year or the last couple of years, then it'll be a good deal as long as he does that well enough into the contract. And obviously, Nylander goes, which is, obviously sad for a lot of fans, but it gives him a whole different kind of player. So let me know what you think of that. I mean, to be honest, I don't know that would be a deal that would go down. Now, I know the Canucks are open to trading Miller, according to Vancouver media. So there is that. The same kind of predicament with the no-move clause kicking in. So they have to do it before July 1, or they're probably not going to do it at all, unless Miller wants to. Obviously, it involves Nylander going to Vancouver, and obviously it allows them to get rid of Murray. I can see the Murray part to Chicago maybe being an option regardless of what happens. It could be the second year in a row that we see the Leafs have to pay a team and take a goaltender off their books. So that deal that Dubas did with the center is not looking good at the moment. And obviously, like I said, Miller for Nylander. So the other trade involves Mitch Marner being traded to the LA Kings. This is an interesting package. It gets them a whole different look as well, but it gets them younger, cheaper contracts, at least for the short term, but players that could evolve into being huge parts of the Leafs down the road, which would send them the former number 2 overall pick, Quinton Byfield, defenseman Sean Durzi, who was a Leaf pick and is turning out to be a pretty good NHL defenseman. Of course, he was traded to the Los Angeles Kings a few years back. And then, of course, Jordan Spezza, another young defenseman coming back to the Leafs, as well as a conditional top 10 protected first round pick. So the Kings would trade a first probably in 2024 or 25, a couple of young defensemen, and Quinton Byfield for Mitch Marner. So that would do a couple of things for the Leafs. Obviously, losing Marner is a big blow. Good playmaker, good two-way forward, sulky nominee, which would be a huge boost for the LA Kings, who we know are looking to make this type of trade. Wouldn't be shocked if LA makes a similar type of move this offseason. I'm not convinced it's going to be Marner, but something along those lines. A player of that type of magnitude for a bunch of younger players that have a ton of potential. It's absolutely something we could see, just not necessarily these two teams. But yeah, I mean, the Leafs obviously would get a potential really good top 6 center in Byfield, who's still really young, from Ontario. Dursey, again, Spence, a couple of young defensemen who could replace Wolgren and still gives them another one to boot. A first-round pick, which could develop into a decent prospect, or give them some more trade currency to get another player. But obviously losing Marner is a massive blow, but they get a lot of cap flexibility because these guys are all making smaller deals right now because they're still young and not graduating into bigger contracts, whereas Marner's making a ton of money and they can use that cap flexibility to add other pieces. So, do I like the deal? Not really. I think if they're going to trade Marner or Nylander, they need a superstar, top quality player coming back who can help them on day one. And I don't think anybody in this LA deal fits that description. The first deal involving Nylander would be a little bit more likely with Miller being that guy who could step in and help and give them a new element. I know he's not Brady or Matthew Tkachuk, but at least he plays a physical, power forward type of style of the game. He can be to that level, although not quite, in my opinion, to the same level as those guys, but he is that type player, would give them a whole different look, for sure. Would he fit with the other guys, and would it all work out? I don't know, but it's an interesting thought. At least that deal, to me, is a little closer to working out, but at the end of the day, I don't know what we're going to see. It's a lot going to depend on who the new GM is. Well, let me know your thoughts on these two proposed trades. Let me know your thoughts on the Shanahan press conference. Jason Spezza leaving. Is Sheldon Keefe going to stick around? Who's the new GM going to be? So many questions have now arisen in Leafland. It's going to be a very interesting next couple of weeks as all of this unfolds. Let me know your thoughts in the comments. We'll discuss further. If you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe and stick around. We'll keep you up to date with all the news, rumors, and analysis of all 32 NHL teams. Thank you for watching, and I'll catch you next time.